Wurzel, and you're watching PHTV4 Spotlight. Today's Spotlight is on fall and winter birding, and we're going to talk a little bit about Cornell University's Project Feeder Watch, I believe, right? And
Right.
we're at Wild Bird Unlimited. We're with owner Mel Tracy. He and his wife own Wild Bird Unlimited in Palos Park here on LaGrange Road. Mel, it's good to see you again. I know we've had several conversations. Last one wasn't necessarily the funnest one. We were talking about avian flu.
Right.
So I'd like to get a little bit of an update on that from you, and then also we're in that transition period where I think we're past the fall migration, we're headed into the winter, and what that kind of means for our backyard birders. But how about the first part of that?
Okay, so avian flu was a huge concern, and I think you mentioned before about the swans, and because there's some kind of famous little swans we got going over here, and they did get infected with that avian flu. And avian flu, just so you know, it doesn't affect any of the backyard birds. So we kind of talked about that, how it really doesn't have much of an effect on the birds here. But and that held true. There was not a single case that I know of a backyard bird getting it. But the ducks up north, it kind of still lives in them. They kind of get immune to it. They build up immunities to it. And then when they came back down, some of the younger ducks or the swans or something that get infected, it will have like real detrimental effects on them.
Okay. So then where are we at if we're past the migration, and I take it the avian flu thing is moving past us too, is right? Okay. So how was, in general, other than that part of it, how was the fall migration, the birding, and, typical?
I would say, a lot of people got into birding around 2020, and we had this just unbelievable, amazing year, and it's like, that just isn't going to happen every year, So it was kind of a slower year this year. We are getting, things are still happening. Like I just had my first juncos in the yard. So there's still some guys coming down from up north. There's a guy, Ron Pittman, who does, he used to do a thing called the Finch Report. So you can kind of look up if you're interested to see kind of what the winter finches are going to do. Right now we've got some birds moving through, but it's not big numbers. We've got, some pine siskins coming in, and a couple years ago in 2020, actually, I had 50 of them under my feeder. It was crazy, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's expensive to feed these guys, But anyway, so some of those guys are coming through. A lot of people are having red-breasted nuthatches. I personally don't have any right now, but some of those guys are coming through. Rick, who works here, actually hand-fed one because a lot of these guys don't have experience with people. They don't know we can be mean, right? So they're very trusting, and he just was out there filling his feeders, and the bird came in. He held out some peanuts,
Wow.
and the red-breasted nuthatch was eaten out of his hand. So I've had that same thing, but I've chased after him a little bit more to get him to do it. But you can train them pretty easy. But anyway, so those guys are coming around.
I can't imagine you get a blue jay to do that, though. Hold out a peanut for a blue jay, or are you going to tell me that's possible?
I bet it would be possible. It's one of these things. It's like you got to have the patience. You know what I mean? To kind of really train them. And blue jays are a little bit more skittish than.
How about looking around your store and behind us, you have a lot of fall decoration stuff out, and cool seasonal stuff. So birding in some respects, we're thinking, well, yeah, the fall migration, birding, we're moving on, or there's still some birds hanging around. But there are things that we actually can do or should do in the winter to keep either our feeders alive or the birds active in the area who are here, right? What kinds of things do we do for winter birding?
Yeah, that's a great point. A couple of things. People a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, my goldfinches are gone, so I'm going to stop feeding." And they don't realize that the goldfinches like change colors and they're totally all brown. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, I thought those were all sparrows on my feeder," and it's like, no, those are the goldfinches. They just change colors. And the other thing, it's kind of funny. I get not half, but there's a fair number of people who come in and they only feed in the summer, and then I get a whole other set of people who only feed in the winter. So the kind of mindset for the summer is, well, they can kind of get their own, and I'll feed them in the winter. And it is true that with the winter feeding, they need a lot more calories, to make it through. So, I mean, it's really beneficial to the birds if you're going to feed them in the winter. And then I don't know if you're kind of hinted at this, but also offering water is another great thing you can do for the birds, because It just has to do with the way the physical change that we can't drink ice. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, and so it takes a lot of energy to take that ice and turn it into water. And so the birds, a lot of times they just don't have that caloric, energy in order to change that. So water is really important for the birds.
Okay, so they can, and I know you have them here, like it sounds like luxurious to me,
Yeah.
but actually it's not. The idea of a bird water source that's actually heated, right?
Right,
The little trays and things. Yeah, so keep feeding them, it sounds like, is a good advice,
Yeah.
and the importance of water for them. Let's take a look at the next item I wanted to, and maybe, and I think I saw this in your email, or I looked on your website. So we're talking about the winter, but there's also some things we can do in the fall, talking about preparing for the spring when they come back, and that's the plants that we put in the garden, or types of trees we can put in the ground.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit, like the gardening or the
Yeah.
prep work for spring that actually takes place now?
Yeah, sure. So birds I think I read somewhere that you can double the chance of a bird surviving the winter by providing it with food. So that's super vital to get them to spring. But then once spring comes, they can't really feed their babies. Most birds can't feed their babies just like nuts and seeds. They have to feed them like little caterpillars and inchworms, those types of things. And those only grow on native plants. So the insects only lay their eggs to turn them into caterpillars on native plants. So it's so important to get some native plants. I mean, we're blessed in this region that the whole Palos area was so preserved that there's so much nature out there. There's so many native plants, and that there's an abundance of these critters and bugs that we kind of have great birding here. But just to bring it into your own yard, if you can just, maybe a 10 by 10, 100 or whatever, maybe a 5 by 10, a little area, and just dedicate that to being some native plants. And then work from there, maybe put in a native shrub, because native shrubs can provide tons of these, insects that are totally necessary for these birds.
That's interesting, because it reminds me that I think a lot of people think of, when we talk about native plants, we're thinking about the butterflies, the pollinators, and they're important for that. But it's actually part of the larger ecosystem that includes the birds,
Right.
and why they need that same native plant environment, right? Is that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you just kind of look big picture, it's like the sun, creates all this energy, and the plants are the first kind of level. And that's, without the sun, we don't get anything. So then with the plants, the next level is the insects, and the insects are food for so many things. And so that's the next building block. And so we got to make sure we have the right plants, so we have the insects,
Okay, if we've covered the birding that we want to talk to, I think the final topic we want to take a look at is the Cornell University Project Feeder Watch, if I'm getting that right. Can you tell us what that project is, and what the goal of it is, and then if somebody wants to get involved in that, how they do that?
So it's a citizen science project, and what that means is, as citizens, we kind of just gather the data. We kind of look at our feeders, tally what birds we're seeing, the numbers of the birds we're seeing, and then you send this into Cornell. And Cornell is kind of like an aggregator, and they get all this data, all this information, and then what it really does is it fuels the questions. So you don't know what you don't know, and so all of a sudden, for instance, grackles. I always talk about grackles, and people say, they're like, oh my gosh, they're all over the place, right? But they went from 180 million birds to down to 60 million. So that's 2/3 of their population, And when I tell people that, they say, well, about half of those 60 million are in my yard right now.
I feel like I've seen that lately. They just sent, I felt like I was in a scene from The Birds, the Hitchcock movie the other day.
Like, oh my gosh. But so then the scientists can say, okay, I'm going to look into why this is happening and see what's out there. Other birds that like the red-breasted nuthatch we were just talking about, they typically go, there's a lot here, and then there's not, and then there's a lot and not. And so they kind of look into why that is, And then there's these kind of long-term things. Like I just looked up for American robin. I looked at the chart of that. And back in our area, just back in 1990 when they started doing all this data, they were about maybe 33, about a third of feeders saw robins, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this because now it's 70%. Like in a very short amount of time, more than doubling, robins being at feeders in the wintertime. So it's like, what's driving this,
I could see where it not only is it collecting a lot of good information, excuse me, good information, and then people get to contribute to that. And I said, and they can see the information too, right? We can look at it ourselves. It's also an important element in getting a sense of the health of the community, the birding community,
and I think it's just rewarding. It's rewarding, number one, because you're watching your birds, and actually it's like, hey, don't bother me right now, okay? I'm doing science here, so leave me in my coffee to watch my bird feeders for a half hour, no interruptions. And it can be as little as 15 minutes. You don't have to be there for all day or anything like that. But then you take ownership of kind of what's going on, like you said. You're like, okay, you're kind of involved in the science project to help the birds, to help science. And so, I mean, and the other thing is not what the benefits to you are, while you're watching nature. I mean, it's been proven your blood pressure's coming down, right? I mean, you're not thinking about elections or, whatever bad things are going on, it's like really bringing the blood pressure down. You're focused on your birds and it's making you healthier. Yeah. I mean, mentally, they've shown it physically and mentally, it's good for your health.
Yeah, I've read several books and articles on that topic. The Nature Fix is an example, how we benefit from it. Certainly, birding is a very nice, easy way, I think, to engage in that type of activity. So, all right, we're going to recommend take a look at Cornell University's Project Feeder Watch. That's a great thing
Just
to take
do
a
the
look.
Google, right?
Yeah,
Just
Google, and you'll find it.
Project Feeder Watch, and it'll be the first thing.
Can you give us any other information on, like, what is the time frame, or can they jump in any time, like when the project runs? Are there any requirements involved in it, like what people should expect?
That's a great question, yeah. So I didn't say. So it starts November 1st. Okay. You can do it once, or you can do it they don't want you to do it more than once a week. So, you can do it every week and it runs through April. So, a lot of opportunities to do it. You can jump in whenever you want. And, it is, they ask for a $15 donation. And that's to just kind of help cover the costs of all the science projects they're funding. Yeah. So,
I'd say $15 seems pretty nominal, especially for the type of research they're doing, and that you get to contribute to it is kind of nice. All right.
If you've got a classroom or something, I mean, what better project could you have? You have the kids watch outside the windows for 15 minutes, and aggregate it, talk about science and research, or even if you want to do it as a library or something like that, you could do it there. I mean, there's a lot of great opportunities for teaching and bringing kids in and growing
practical involvement in the research instead of something that they read distantly about in a book or okay. All right.
I mean, could you imagine if you're a kid and you're like, hey, I contributed to that study? You know what I mean? That would be an amazing feeling, right?
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. All right, Mel, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure visiting with you, and you got a lot of great stuff in the store. And it's kind of exciting to, think about the Cornell, University Project Feeder Watch. It's pretty cool.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always great. Thank you for coming out.
All right, I'm Dave Wurzel, and you've been watching Spotlight. Today's Spotlight has been on birding in the fall and winter and the Cornell University Feeder Project. Thank you for watching.